Hey everybody, what's going on? Steve Bauman here, going to do a live sketch. I've got this portrait of a young guy here that I'm going to try to draw pretty well on this toned paper. I've got a bit of, so you can see my materials. I got a bit of, let's see, a bit of white chalk here in this pencil. I've got obviously my 0.5 millimeter and 0.3 millimeter, and then a lead holder. This has got 4H lead in it, and this is my paper stump that is well saturated with graphite. And of course, as always, right, my kneaded eraser here. Right, so I'm just going to dive in. There's been a few questions already, so I'm just going to get into the questions. If you have a question, go ahead and chuck it into the comments, and I'll get to it as soon as I possibly can. And let's see what else. I think that's all I need to say. Let me just get into the drawing and kind of see where we go from there. Previously, right, I've been drawing a lot in colored pencils and things. Oh, by the way, yeah, if you're watching on YouTube, just let me know the audio is okay. That way my mind can be totally at ease, and I don't have to be stressed out or gonna worry that I'm not getting across to you guys. Yeah, so if you could do that, that'd be super awesome. And if you can't do that, then I'll just have to go on not knowing. All right, so by the way, if any of you are at Drawing Essentials Part 2, you'll know I tend to do a little bit of kind of a Loomis type head when I block in. And so I've got my sphere here. And I wouldn't say, by the way, that necessarily I'm a great Loomis head practitioner. I think you go to the Stan Prokopenkos of the world for that. I'm more of a Loomis hobbyist. And so I see the value in it, but at the same time, it's not really a part of what I trained, so I kind of just improvise with it a little bit. There's a bunch of questions, like I said, that already came in, and as soon as I can kind of look up from this, I'm going to go ahead and get to some of those questions. But I just want to make sure. I'm going to try something with this one that I haven't really done that much before, which is actually during one of these live streams, try to make a good drawing. I've always just kind of sacrificed that notion that if I'm live streaming, I'm not going to be making my most focused drawing. But I'm going to try and take my time here and try to make something kind of good out of this. So we'll see if that actually works. I mean, working live is can be pretty tricky. So we'll see what happens. So one of the first questions was from somebody who has a username that's kind of unpronounceable, but says, "Hi, is there a way you can explain how, when painting, to depict ceramic by glazing?" Well, I mean, I don't know if I can say necessarily by glazing, but in general, when you're drawing or painting a ceramic surface, which basically what we're talking about is a highly reflective surface. And for that, let's say that it's a white ceramic vase. When you're doing that, the kind of local value of the white ceramic needs to be actually relatively dark. And this kind of goes into that classic question that you get from there's a friend of mine, I always talk about him. He runs a video game agency in Gothenburg. One of the things he asks his artists when he hires them is what color is snow, right? And it's this classic art director question. And of course the answer is whatever color the light is, right? So if the light is quite warm, then something that's white will be a warm temperature. And if it's something that's the light is quite blue, as it is in the shadows in snow, for instance, then it's going to be quite cold. So the thing I want to get to with this white ceramic vase is that it needs to have a slightly darker local value so that the highlight can kind of stand out a little bit more. And if you do that, you should be able to kind of create, whether through glazing or not. I mean, the glazing part is the part I don't really glaze that much myself, so it's not really a big subject in certainly in my teaching and in my own work. I don't tend to glaze very much. So I don't think you really need to glaze it, actually. I think there's maybe this impression that to get to like subtlety or to kind of get to some other place that glazing's like really important. I don't know if it's all that important, frankly. I mean, in the sense that it's not like necessary. You can do it and it's cool, but it's not thinking like, oh, I'm not going to be able to paint this unless I glaze it, So anyway, I'm going to get to the next question there. MJ is asking, which do you prefer, wooden pencils or lead holders? Well, I guess like a mechanical pencil is like halfway in between a lead holder and a wood pencil. I don't really have a preference. I mean, I use both. I have used both. I continue to use both. So it's kind of like I don't know. I don't really differentiate maybe so much in between them. I think that I would love to like wood pencils more, just because I think they're so simple. There's no manufacturers, no design in it. I mean there is, I guess, in a sense, but like it's the same design it has been for like since pencils were invented. Which, by the way, if anybody out there has like hardcore like pencil manufacturing knowledge, let me know when. Actually, this is an interesting one. So I was talking with a friend of mine, Brandon Soloff, runs Chelsea Classical Studio, and they've kind of made these brushes, like totally redesigned these paintbrushes. Like nobody has designed a paintbrush like these paintbrushes ever before. Like literally hasn't existed. It's a brand new thing. And we were talking about like why he wanted to do it and what his ideas were about it. And he said that nobody had like reconsidered the design of paintbrushes for like over, whatever, 200 years or something, right? Like since the standard paintbrush was developed, everybody just kind of left it alone after that. So you had brushes where, actually I don't have any paintbrushes here at reach by my kind of drawing board, but they have that like kind of narrowed out back and it gets kind of wider towards the ferrule, towards the tip. And so he designed one that was like a lot more balanced. That was his like solution. He wanted to kind of create something that was a lot more balanced. Basically my question then is like, when was the last time pencil design was considered or was thought up? Be kind of curious to know that, because it is kind of generic. Is there out there some version of like a better pencil? I'd love to. And I mean, there's all those things where, like where people like kind of design stuff that doesn't need to be designed, like, electric scissors or something, like where it's like nobody's asking for that. The world doesn't need that. It's not really filling any niche. I'm sure that there's some like nouveau pencil out there that does something that like nobody needs it to do. But I guess I've never even like really asked myself the question, how would I design a pencil if I was the one who was like in charge of designing pencils? What would I change about it? Which is not at all what MJ is asking. He's just asking, do you like wood or lead holders? But it makes me think of something else kind of entirely. Which is, I guess that's my right to do if I'm doing a Q&A. Right, so Hoadu says, Happy Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day to you as well. Hoadu is also asking, what's your opinion on contemporary art? I can't quite understand them. Yeah, I mean, it's tough for me to even say because probably contemporary art kind of moves so fast. I mean, it's probably changed, a dozen times since I really last kind of was interested in it. I mean, there was a period where I was kind of quite interested in artists like, Robert Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns and Franz Klein. And actually, I brought those up in my, when you're going to a school like the Florence Academy, you have like an interview with the founder. So um, I was in that interview, and I was being asked like, well, what artists are you into? You know, and in retrospect, I understand you're supposed to say like, oh, I love Sargent and Velasquez. That's the artist that I'm into, and that way you kind of fit into the group, such as it is. And I was like, yeah, I really like Rauschenberg and Klein, and which is obviously like totally the wrong thing to say, I guess, to kind of fit in. And his response was, the guy I was interviewing with was, oh yeah, no, I never really understood what they were trying to say. And I guess I probably have that feeling about maybe a lot of like super contemporary artists today. Like when I had a studio at my wife and I lived in the States, we had a studio at this place called Mana Contemporary, which is a big kind of contemporary enclave in New Jersey. And like a lot of the work, I didn't really have any sense of like context for it. It's kind of speaking in this formal language that just I'm not even tuned into. So what do I think of it? I think I don't really know a lot about it. I could speak to what I like about Jasper Johns, or what I like about trying to think of like some other artists instead of just mentioning those few. Like there's even elements of like Paul Klee's work that I think is kind of interesting, and Marcel Duchamp, of course, among the Dadaists, was obviously very kind of stimulating and interesting. But it just doesn't really fall into my, I spend so much time these days like within my profession. I don't have like a ton of time for what's kind of peripheral to that profession, if that makes sense. Right, but I'm gonna get on to the next question here. Hoadu is asking how to finish a whole sketch of the body, like the human body, in 4 hours. Any tips? What I think it's going to involve adjusting your conception of what like finished is, like what does finished look like, and that's going to relate to this idea of kind of form sense, right? Like how do you determine like what your kind of finished drawing actually looks like? And we all have to address that to a greater or lesser degree as we're kind of making our own work. Even with this sketch, am I going to finish this sketch in the same way that I would finish, say, a drawing that I take 9 to 12 hours on? No, I need to kind of adjust my end point there. Adjust what I think a finished drawing actually will look like. And if I do that efficiently, if I do that smartly, I should be able to kind of create a sense of finish that is like commensurate with the amount of time that I actually have to work. So that's the idea in general. But probably, just I wouldn't invest too heavily in values. Values usually take a long time to build up, but that's also like kind of depending upon what medium you're using, right? So if you're using a medium like graphite, of course, yeah, like it's going to take you quite a while to build up the necessary value if you have kind of a value-based finishing point. Whereas, let's say you're doing like a line drawing of the figure, you don't have that kind of like backlog or that need to kind of build up a lot of value in order to kind of get to a place where you could call what you're doing finished. So that would be my advice. Trying to adjust your concept of finish, really. Maybe work in line in general. A lot of amazing questions. A whole bunch of people here on YouTube, so that's really nice. If you're watching on Instagram, by the way, which I'm simulcasting this, there's a link in my stories. Hop over to YouTube for the 4K version of this. Let's see. Daniel Morris said, I enjoy drawing the clothed figure, but not the nude as much. Of course, I know anatomy helps, but how much do I need to learn? This is a cool point. I've always looked at, anatomy in terms of like need to learn. All right, I'll say this. I drew the figure for, I don't know, about several years, but for a while I drew the figure really without considering too much anatomy. And you can go a long way before anatomy starts to make like a huge impact, I guess, on your drawing. Like, and it's even something where I think it takes a little while of studying anatomy before it actually makes its way into your drawing, right? Because, like, just because you know something, sorry, it's cold in my house, so I have like a runny nose. But just because you know something doesn't mean it's like making its way into your drawing at all, right? You can have like, in a way, like kind of latent knowledge, you know, of things before they really find their way into like expressing themselves in your work. So I would say you don't necessarily need to like learn anatomy in order to like draw certainly like the draped figure at all. Like it's really just a matter of, you know, are you interested to learn it? And I think that's the other thing too, is that I know probably the vast majority of you, like I'm talking to you and you're kind of asking these questions from the standpoint of like self-education, right? Like how you can, you know, best understand things through self-study. And self-study has like slightly different requirements, I feel like. Like if you are not interested in a subject, it's going to be very difficult to like motivate yourself to like get out there and do it for the amount of time necessary to like become good at it. Whereas if you're on fire to learn something, your self-study is going to be a lot more efficient. Or at least this is, you know, I'm just using myself as a guide to kind of understand how it would be. You know, if, and I mean, I still like, honestly, I'm still studying tons of things constantly. You know, I mean, most of what I study nowadays, no, I don't want to say most, but probably a larger proportion than I ever imagined of what I have to learn nowadays is actually studying kind of business ideas, because there is maybe an art, you could say, to running your own business. Certainly there are very nuanced ideas about it, and ways to kind of manage your time and understand what you're doing and so on. And so like a lot of what I have to study is that, but I have to like kind of I have to stay stimulated, stay active, you know, in terms of how I stay motivated to do that. And so that's how I kind of think of, you know, some people, you know, learning anatomy are probably like, they're thinking to themselves like, ugh, this is not my favorite part of what I want to study. So, you know, how do I stay motivated to do it is like it's kind of a big deal. But yeah, it's not like a magic bullet. Like you can draw the figure without anatomy. It's possible. I don't think anatomy teachers would be happy with me for saying that, but it is possible to do. I've seen many people do it over the years, and you know, I mean, you can. And by the way, it's not like learning anatomy doesn't mean, oh well, if I study anatomy, I'm going to study it like totally comprehensively, and I'm going to learn every single thing about it that's possible to learn. I mean, that's not realistic, and that doesn't really generally work that way. You know, I spent years studying anatomy, and then years teaching anatomy, through which obviously you learn a lot about anatomy through teaching it as well. Before I came to the point of knowledge that I have, which I wouldn't even say is comprehensive. So, you know, just take it in bits. You know, I mean, you know, take it in terms. All right. So actually, interesting point. I'll bring this up now. I'm considering, and I've been considering for a while, like, how do I bring anatomy into my online teaching? Because I'm not going to teach a comprehensive anatomy course. You know, good friend of mine, Stan Prokopenko, he's been working on his for 5 years. It was initially, I think he told me, it was initially going to be like a 2-year project. That was like his timeline for developing this course. It's been 5 years developing it. And it's amazing, obviously. Like, it's, you know, if you know Stan and you know his work, like he's like kind of the, you know, the standard bearer for kind of online education, has been for many, many years. So, looking at that as like a case study, that's not where I'm going to be with kind of course development. But I do have like all this anatomy that I want to share because I think, first of all, like it's very useful. Second of all, it's kind of a passion of mine, and third of all, like I know it's highly useful when you're kind of learning to draw. So for all those reasons, I've been toying around with the idea, and you guys can tell me what you think of this in the comments. My conception of it is this. I think that a course called something like Anatomy I Actually Use would be like really, really useful for students, which obviously the concept is a bit in the name. So this idea that just trying to boil it down to like the essential features of the practice, at different levels as well. Like, because I think when you're starting out, in a drawing at this stage, what kind of anatomy you're using is like a different story in terms of like, what kind of anatomy you're going to use in a drawing that's much more advanced, for instance. So yeah, there's levels, and I thought addressing it in those terms would be really useful. You think it's a great idea, let me know, and it will get closer to the front of the queue of all the other stuff that I've got to do tutorial wise. All right, so Awesome Piselli. All right, I can't pronounce the screen name. I think it's Awesome Epicelli. Says, got my drawing stuff ready to draw along with you. That's great. And Hoadu is asking, what camera do you use to picture the model? I use a Panasonic GH5 for all of my footage and photography. Let's see. Kex the artist says, yeah, taking a portrait from the start. All right. Hello from Holland. A lot of comments. C. Langley is saying, do you have any tips for how to deal with the age of a person in a portrait? For example, lines and wrinkles. And conversely, how do you approach portraits of children? It's an interesting one. I don't think that I've really painted portraits of children. I mean, there's one like watercolor I did of my nephew on my wife's side of the family. But beyond that, I don't know that I've really... Well, what am I saying? I did a portrait of a colleague of mine's daughter, but it was a part of like a much larger painting, so I don't think of it like as a child portrait. But basically, you're working with like a lot more unified lights at that point, and yeah, I think it's unfortunately like it's actually not tremendously complicated how to deal with like portraits of children, because basically you just keep your transitions really soft. You keep your light shapes relatively unified, and after that it's just painting a portrait of somebody, right? And the same traits can create like the same effect with an older person. So if you keep your light shape a lot more unified, it's going to take some years off because you're not adding in these kind of particularities, this particular wrinkle. I mean, it's a value shape after all. As much as it's a wrinkle, it's also formally a value shape. So adding fewer of those means that you're going to have less instance of kind of creating age. You see it all the time with like the nasolabial fold, which is this little passage right here. When you start to add that in, it automatically adds like 5 to 10 years to the model. So that's usually my starting point. I almost never take commissions or anything. So the idea that someone would commission me and then ask me to make them look younger, it just doesn't come up. But that would be one of the places where I'd start. I'd start not aging them by doing that. So yeah, hope that helps. Let's see. Some people excited about the broadcast here. Juliana Lindquist is saying, hi Stephen, I'm having trouble with the notion of soft but specific, especially how to place those shapes because they are soft. What measurements to take for the placement of the jugular notch? I believe, I guess the jugular notches must be either the like cartilage of the throat or the hyoid bone. I'm not actually sure what the jugular notch is. It's just a terminology thing. I mean, I'm sure it's referring to one of the throat structures or other. Um, but how to put it? I don't think you really want to take measurements for soft but specific. I guess the nebulous character of the edge dictates that it's not going to respond well to measuring, because if you have an edge like let's say like this, like where do you measure up to? I think that was something actually that always troubled me, is that I was trying to like use measuring for maybe something that it necessarily wasn't as good for. Like a soft halftone edge is not, it's not the greatest place to get the most utility out of a measurement. So I try to measure things, like measure them out at this stage. By the time you're really dealing with soft but specific, if I'm totally honest, by the time you're dealing with it, you probably should be eyeballing most of what you're doing, rather than measuring at that point. So it's my advice. Hopefully, it doesn't sound too counterintuitive, but I would reconsider your kind of measurement strategy, or how you're using measuring if you feel like that's the thing that's kind of standing in the way of you getting kind of soft but specific, because that's generally going to mean that you're trying to add like probably harder edges than are necessary, because you're measuring up to a place. That's an assumption, of course, like just based on, I mean, I haven't seen your work obviously, so I don't know if that's the case, but it kind of sounds like it could be to me. So soft but specific probably is going to mean a little bit less measuring at that point. That would be my guess. Let's see. A lot of questions coming in. Bernard Chua says, "Hi, I'd like to ask, what do you think are the most common anatomy mistakes?" Ooh, that's like that's like one of those it's like one of those top 5 questions, right? Like you see everybody's YouTube videos, like top 5, I don't know, cast drawing mistakes, or top 5 shading mistakes. They always call it shading on YouTube, by the way. It's never modeling form. But that's another issue altogether. Maybe I'll get into that here one day, like the shading versus modeling form dichotomy. But yes, so top mistakes for using anatomy. Well, top mistakes. I don't know if I actually don't know if I'm not like really prepared. I don't really know if there are necessarily 5 mistakes that people do. You'd probably have to like kind of drill down a little bit in terms of like, are we talking at what stage of the drawing, or are we talking at any stage of the drawing? I think there's several levels to that question. I think one of the things, okay, here's one that I think is probably a top 5 mistake. Is that they do not create a good balance in between the visual elements in their drawing and the conceptual, structural, anatomical elements in their drawing. So for anatomy to like work really well in a drawing, it has to attach itself in a way to the visual impression. It still has to be guided by values, right? Because that's what's going to create the sense of form. That is going to be what creates like the general impression in the drawing. So you get these drawings that are, probably way too much of anatomy and not enough of the kind of impression of what they're about. Maybe one of these days, and I don't want to like get anybody's hopes up, but maybe one of these days I'll do one of my anatomy studies live, because I have a very specific process that I go through to study anatomy in drawing. Something I developed over the years. Partly through teaching, but also partly, obviously before teaching, because it was a big part of my visual anatomy course. And the crux of it was that you needed to correlate the anatomy to something in order for it to be like a really effective part of your like drawing and painting life. So rather than learning anatomy and then trying to apply it to a drawing or painting, we would be like drawing and painting, or drawing specifically, and then like using anatomy to draw with. So I think that's probably a big issue for students, in a way, is actually like how they go about assimilating that kind of drawing information, how that leads them to making a different kind of aesthetic drawing than perhaps they'd be looking for. You know, it can become a little bit like the tail wagging the dog, right? Like you're drawing. I mean, at least for me, I didn't start making drawings in order to make anatomy studies. I started making anatomy studies to make my drawings better. But that's just me. I mean, other people, they're just like die hard in for anatomy, and that's what they want to do. Then that's a different kind of conversation. Probably just a different kind of anatomy teacher, frankly. Like there's people out there that are, and this is where I realized my threshold was. Like, there's people I know that have like gone to operating theaters and worked in dissections and things. And like that was never me as an anatomy student, never me as an anatomy teacher. Like I was never going to be cutting up bodies in order to kind of learn more about the figure. Yeah, it was very much more a means to an end for me. Let's see. More questions coming in. How to get a likeness. I really struggle with that. I already cried on a drawing because I couldn't get it right. Any tip would be great. I feel like I want to work on giving people a more satisfying advice in this question, because the reality is all the stuff that I'm doing now, like in this drawing, there's not actually a likeness in it. I'm just developing a head up into a point at which I can probably make a good likeness. And I think this is the disconnect for a lot of students, is that you have a lot to do before you can even talk about likeness. Likeness is more of a cumulative goal. Like if I do all the stuff at this stage really well, then probably I can get a decent likeness. If I fail to do all the stuff really well, probably my chances of achieving a good sense of likeness will be greatly diminished. So I think that you kind of need to like look deeper, in terms of like what you need to do to achieve a likeness, because it's not like a separate, like having good values in a drawing. You can have good values in a drawing and still have like a bad drawing. That's fine. That means so it's possible to like study values without studying likeness, but studying likeness without studying values, it just doesn't happen, because your drawing will kind of fail to like look like what it's of if your values are bad, for instance. So you'll lose that sense of likeness. Anyway, that's kind of the beginning of the conversation about it. So to format that into a satisfying answer, I'll say this. You probably just need to work a lot longer on your block-in. Get a lot better at this stage, and you're much more likely to get a good likeness in the end, because the accumulation of your efforts will have been starting out from a very useful place. So that's what I have to say about that. Let's see. Shubha Sharma is asking, what tips for creating harmony with shading? This is a cool question. I like also that it's kind of addressing this idea that, shading or adding value or modeling form, however we want to put it, that it's like has a knock-on effect with other things, right? So when we're talking about harmony, maybe one of the easiest ways to think about harmony is think about unity, right? Like if you look at all of this value here, it's all totally unified in a sense. Like in this little area here, there is nothing that is like not harmonious. It's in a way in perfect harmony, which probably actually it's kind of interesting, because perfect harmony in a way can be like a little bit boring, right? Like if there's actually nothing going on, it's not that interesting. So you need a little bit of maybe a little bit of contrast, a little bit of discord, a little bit of kind of breaking up that ultimate harmony in order to kind of get to a place that's actually quite satisfying. But in terms of, I mean, like, I think probably what the question is leading to, and I try to, I was trying to catch myself because maybe the question that I want to answer isn't exactly the question being asked. I find this idea of like what is like the nature of harmony and value probably a little bit more interesting. But I think the question is probably a technical one, which is to say, how do you like apply values in a way that eventually creates a harmonious sense of like rendering. And really that's just about super sharp pencils, and taking a long kind of even time to kind of get your values nice and flat, and very deliberate. After that, you got to think about your vision and your ability to like organize a drawing in general. So there are problems that come up because you believe that, there's a dark value within a light plane and there's a light value within a dark plane. That creates a sense of disharmony as well. So I think you need to look at like kind of multiple areas, obviously, there to come to a place where you have a feeling of control about that. So I think learning to see values appropriately is going to be very useful to you in that endeavor. Which, with that in mind, I do want to mention that coming up March 1st, part 3 of the Drawing Essentials series is coming out. And in that part, I'm going to be doing a live cast drawing demo. And I'm going to be going through, like, literally the deep catalog of everything that I have to say about cast drawing and how it applies to the kind of foundation of a student's kind of learning experience. And this is built up over however many years, 12 years or so, 13 years that I taught cast drawing at the certainly at the Florence Academy. And I mean, even beyond that, like, I'm just a cast drawing buff. Like, I just loved cast drawing as a student. I loved it as a professional. It's always been like really such like a passion project for me, working with sculpture and with plaster casts and things. So it's really, I'm just really excited about it because I love the subject. But also it's going to be kind of the culmination of this 3-part Drawing Essentials series, where hopefully I'm going to get everybody up to speed on the kind of like conceptual language necessary, I think, to be a good drawing student, because hopefully one of the things that it'll combat is that sense of, and I had this very much so when I was a student, is that sense of like not knowing what you don't know, which is a really tough place. And I think we all kind of, start out in that place to a greater or lesser degree as drawing students. We don't know what we don't know. And so that necessarily makes it a little bit harder for us to like seek out like the right kind of knowledge, right? Because we all know that not every kind of drawing class is the same. Not every project is going to lead you to the place necessarily where you want to go. So you need to be, as a student, you need to like kind of develop a bit of a discerning eye about understanding what's useful. I certainly didn't know that. So in a way, this course, Drawing Essentials, is meant to kind of get people in the door in terms of like developing their own kind of taste and their own roadmap as students to kind of where they're trying to go and where they're trying to get to. I feel like that was harmony with shading. Huge digression. C. Langley is asking, I find it hard to scale from a source image to paper, mainly because of measuring. I therefore find myself working one-to-one most of the time. Do you have any advice on how to break free from that? Yeah, I think that in a way, I think a big part of that is maybe understanding how to develop best a sense of context, which is to say that really the early part of a drawing, before your drawing becomes your subject, which this is going to get like metaphysical here. But before your drawing is actually of your subject, and let's take like a look at the one I'm making here, for instance. You know, this doesn't really look anything like my guy over here yet. It's really just a head, and I'm using kind of the moving parts to get around and to try to create a good orientation relationship to each other. Even before this, when I just had like a sphere and like a center line, that's actually where you start to establish scale. So there's something in the really the very earliest part of your drawing that actually you need to focus on, and it's what happens in that first 5 to 10 minutes. When on February 1st, when I did Drawing Essentials Part 2, the end of that that workshop, I talked about Loomis and what I had initially thought about Loomis and how that kind of changed over time. And I think that he's a great place to look in terms of establishing that, because he gives you kind of something to draw before you actually need to start drawing, if that makes sense. I know that's a little bit oblique, and maybe it makes me sound like Yoda, but before your drawing is of your subject, that's where scale is kind of solved. And so you need to take a look at that first 5 to 10 minutes, actually. Let's see. Morris 2934 is saying the lead pencil, which contains no lead, was invented in 1564 when a huge graphite mine was discovered in Borrowdale, Cumbria, England. So the earliest date for pencil production that I'm currently aware of, and thank you, Morris, is 1564. The next question would be, when did the pencil that we commonly understand, right, like this design of wood pencil, when was this developed? Was it 1564? Was it the first pencil just rationally, logically was in this shape? Or has there been any redesign since 1564? That's the next question. Oh, wait, no, I think you might have it in the next comment. It says, pure graphite was sawn into sheets and then cut into square rods. The graphite rods were inserted in hand-carved wooden holders forming pencils. Then this is great. This is like, I hope this does something for you guys, because this is really exciting to me, learning pencil history through the comment section. Someone whose name I won't read on here because it sounds like it might be offensive, says the flat movable eraser on the black wings is about as good as it gets. R. Morris is saying you should, or sorry, Morris 2934 said you should redesign the pencil. It might not need it, who knows? Kex the artist is saying the measurements Bauman is doing right now kind of don't matter if the image is big or small. Yeah, no, that's very true. It's very true. Let's see. I'm looking for another question here. There's a lot of comments. I'm trying to get to a good question. Let's see. We're almost there. I've got a question about lighting. Do you light your figures the same way for portrait paintings? You have a very dramatic lighting for your drawings, which works great for black and white media. No, that's interesting to say. I think that in general, because of what my work is professionally, I tend to have very consistent lighting in between, what I do for drawings, what I do for paintings. I think if I was a portrait painter specifically by profession, like taking commissions by profession, I would probably have to use a lot more fill light. I wouldn't be able to necessarily get away with as deep and kind of empty shadows. People want to be shown in probably a more flattering light rather than a more dramatic one. It's not a rule, but like in general, when you're in a particular trade, when you're in a particular industry, bucking the trends of that industry is not the quickest path to success. It doesn't negate, it doesn't mean you can't be successful to do it that way, but probably the vast majority of commission portraits are going to be done with lighting that is maybe a little bit more soft, a little bit lighter, a little bit less dramatic. The precedent has probably been established by great portrait painters of art history many years before we ever had our kind of say about them. So you know, again, for my job, for what my job is, teaching people to draw and paint, I think in some ways, like that's where my kind of lighting comes from, because the strong and intense, you know, primary dominant light source is probably the best way to kind of reveal the form and the structure of the head. And so that's why I choose it that way. Whether or not that's what you go on to do, of course, is in a way a little bit up to you. I think lighting is one of those things. Like, I talk a lot about how, you know, you're going to be able to do what you train to do. I think like learning about lighting is one of those things where I feel like you can adapt a lot once you figure out how to work in one situation. You know, I guess depending on really how procedural your learning was, you know what I mean? Like, so there, and by this I mean, right? So one of the reasons I focus so much on like concepts in my teaching, and not just any concepts. I feel like I look a lot for concepts that kind of apply across the board. You know, things that you can use in many different situations, not ones that just apply to the lighting situation in which I'm working. I do that because I think you want to be adaptable, because not everybody's vision is exactly the same. Don't think it should be, don't think it has to be. And I don't think like art education or painting and drawing education works best when you teach people to do just one thing in just one situation. I want a little bit more versatility for the people that I work with, partly because, you know, this is something I experienced. You know, I wanted to be able to do different things with what I learned. I didn't want to be trapped into working in one particular way. So the idea of kind of working with different concepts, I think, was for me an easy one. Yeah. So let's see. The question was about like, do I light figures the same way? Yeah, pretty much in general. I mean, it just depends upon like what, you know, like, so let's take it to an artistic direction. Let's say that I want to paint a picture that is really happy and really pleasant and just about like, you know, having a great time in the summer and all that. Like, am I going to use this lighting for that? No, like this is lighting is like deep dark studio lighting that's good for like drama and form and stuff. So, you know, I want to be able to kind of like adapt myself to whatever the expression that I want to make is. You know, lighting is such a big part of expression. And if you're trapped into one kind of lighting, well, I think necessarily your prospects for expression are greatly diminished, because you're kind of boxed in. So that's my take on lighting. I'm going to get a little bit more kind of value going into this. I want to get some value planes kind of established. So maybe like I have a goal like to make a good drawing in the time that I've got with you guys. You know, it's hard because, you know, in general, talking and drawing is not the most efficient version of drawing. But I'm gonna do my best to make a decent one in the time that we have. We'll see what happens. MJ was asking, how do you simplify form? Well, basically you try to look for Apelles lines, look for highlights, and look for kind of breaks in form, and then unify the values inside a given plane. So where you see several different values making up a gradation, instead, you make one value. I mean, that's the basic version of how you simplify form, you know? Think about how, I don't know, like think about how like a finger is like a cylinder, right? If you look at my finger, like, yeah, it looks like it's full of variation and weirdness. But also, at its most basic version, is two parallel lines with an ellipse at either side, which is kind of a cylinder. So you simplify form by taking things away. Let's see. All right, a lot of comments. All right. Julian Miller is saying it's probably difficult to answer, but what do you think about someone who studies by himself exclusively can end up with similar results as someone who trained classically? The So, by the way, let's just take this moment to unpack very slightly the whole classical training thing. You know, classical training in itself is a kind of a nebulous topic. I think frankly, it's used a little bit more as kind of a marketing term than anything else, like to say exactly what a classical education is. By the way, and I know what you mean by your question. I'm going to get to that as well. But it's just there's a particular way that I think classical is kind of used when kind of marketing the kind of training that you're going to get at an atelier. It's kind of a it's not a very precise descriptor of what's going on. Maybe that's the best I can say about it, is that it's not a very precise descriptor. Just like, when we think of classical music, right? Like classical is an era. It's not necessarily like a style, but it gets used as this kind of catch-all generic term. But that's another subject for another time. But can you, it depends upon how much you mean like by yourself, because I think that in general, one of the kind of big divisions in between what you get studying alone and what you get studying, at one of these schools is a tremendous amount of feedback. So you get constant updates on kind of how you're doing at what you're doing. I think that is, in a way, a bit quite invaluable. So studying completely on your own, I mean, you would have to have a really rigorous sense of like both self-criticism and encouragement. It's like this is, I bet people like get really annoyed at my metaphors eventually, because I talk in metaphors all the time. But I've been a skateboarder kind of all my life, and one of the things I know is that, so like the basic like jumping on a skateboard, right? For those of you who don't know, it's called an ollie, right? OLLIE. And you'll never really like ollie as high unless you have something that you're trying to like ollie over. And I think a little bit, there's a little bit of that sense also in terms of like self-education, is that what is the force motivating you, and do you have enough internally to push your place or push yourself to as great a distance as if you were motivated by like a chasing pack? Does that make sense? So that's just the question that I have. Some people have that, and then I think their prospect for self-education massively increases. But you do need to be able to kind of push yourself, not be easily satisfied, and have the necessary like time to kind of commit to it, because I mean, my own education, just for instance, I mean, obviously it's my reference point because it was my experience. But I worked for 5 days a week, at least 6 hours a day, most days 8 hours a day, because you had evening classes. And so you need to be able to replicate that schedule, that amount of time. And I think that's also another place where people will come into some difficulty, is how do you actually without, what's the word, like without a tuition, without like a course set for you, how do you make it certain that you have that amount of time? I think that's a really big challenge, and of course it is a part of, and those of you that kind of keep up with me here, that's a part of why I do these, just to give people like an excuse to draw, because I know that that's probably one of the major factors in just making progress, is just being able to steal that time away and get some work done. I mean, believe it or not, these sessions great excuse for me to draw too. Like, you know, there's so many things in my life that like pull me away from work, you know. But if I can say like, oh, but I've got to, you know, I've got a live stream because it's, you know, I got to reach out to the community and, you know, do all this stuff, then it becomes a little bit easier to like take that time away. So anyway, sure, it's possible. Anything is possible, man. You know, it's about determination, will, interest, you know, motivation, all those things. Let's see. Ivan Levko is saying, I might be biased, but I think the Russians or Slavs in general have a gift for drawing life. Yeah, that's true. Danny Chen is saying, hi, Stephen. Every human face is so unique and different. When I try and draw one, it just becomes general and just turns out what the person is not. How can you catch the nuance of a human face? Yeah, it's kind of a cool question. You know, again, you know, I feel like it's, you know, we all know that metaphor, that story of, you know, like in the bundle of twigs, right? So if you have this like big bundle of twigs in your arms and you need to break it, you know, you can either try and break it all at once, or you can pull one twig out and break it, and pull another twig out and break it, and so on until eventually, you know, you've broken the entire bundle of twigs just one at a time. I think that probably your prospects for achieving likeness will be greatly improved when you don't try to solve it all at once. You know, because generally speaking, is not going to respond particularly well to that, because it's such a complex issue. There's so many moving parts. Maybe that is something where anatomy kind of comes into it, where, you know, you start to understand that the face is not one thing, it's many things, and they're all kind of acting a little bit in concert with each other. And so, you know, when you start to look at it that way, it becomes maybe easier to understand that you have so much to do before like likeness is decided, I guess. Yeah. So I think just, I mean, unfortunately, the answer like is much more of a back to the basics kind of thing than probably would be most interesting to hear. But yeah, I mean, eventually you will come to a place where you have gotten very good at the basics, and then to ask that same question, how do I get to likeness? You're probably talking about a couple different things. So, you know, one of the big roadblocks that I found when working, I mean, I felt like I could get a good block in, which is no small task, but then my drawing would kind of trip up a bit by the time I got to like working with values. And so I needed to learn like what principles were kind of active when using values, which is a totally different story. If you've like learned to just block something in conceptually, learning how value works is, you know, that's the next kind of layer or stage in your education. So you need to kind of go through that portal as well, right? So every stage is like a new kind of knowledge that you need to learn, or at least that's how I think of it, which I find actually very comforting, because if it's something I need to learn, it means it's something that I can do. the only boundary, the only roadblock is, you know, can I take the time to learn it? Whereas, like, if you ask me, how do you become a great artist? Like, I don't know, man. I mean, just work your entire life and keep your fingers crossed, and maybe you get there, maybe not. You know, like, that's not the kind of answer that you want to get to the question of how do you do something, right? Sorry, this is actually where usually like I mess up my live stream drawings, as I'm like answering questions at this critical stage where I'm trying to kind of like line up, you know, the features and make sure the proportions work and stuff. So I'm just trying to get that part right. Shubham Sharma is asking what tips for harmony and shading. I did answer that question actually earlier. Just I don't know if you popped away from your computer at the time, but Michael Allen is asking, what do you do to prep your surface, and what kind of paper do you use? This, oh, by the way, all of that paper questions and stuff, there is a link to my FAQs post that is in the description of this YouTube video. So any question you have, like what pencils do you use, what paper do you use, all that stuff is super accessible, and it is all in the, as I said, in the description of this video. You can get to that. Totally free content. It is not behind a paywall. Although it is on my Patreon, which, like all my tutorials, are behind a paywall. But the FAQs, I consider that like, just public service. If people want to know what paper to draw on, I don't need to withhold that. Let's see. MJ asks, any tips for flat or complex lighting where there's little shadow to use? Just got to remember, everything is round, so look around the edges of the forms for like the values that you want to create. So often, you get that sense of like a light object on a dark background, and what happens is you get these like super bright edges which are really flat. Like you can see, like just adding that bit of value to the edge of his jaw here, his jaw kind of gets quite round, and that's what you have to do in like a flat light, is you just have to create a lot of the form through that. Like a lot of the light internally is actually very flat light, which of course is very difficult. I mean, it's right there in the name, right? The lighting is flat. It does come down to like something interesting, which is there's plenty of like lighting situations that are not conducive to a good drawing or painting. In a way, like the drawing or the painting, can live or die before you start. If you start with a really bad source image, chances are, as just as it sounds, you're unlikely to get to a good result, because your source image or even your setup. I mean, it's a lot of talk about like, photographs and this and that. Like there are plenty of situations from life as well that are flat, and it's not conducive always to a very good painting. It's not impossible, but just not conducive. Someone with a very simple name on YouTube, M, is asking, please teach general anatomy. It's a great idea. They use the medical anatomy app, and it's very different. Tim is asking, do you like the Koh-i-Noor lead holder? I've heard it breaks very easily. Let's do a quick aside about this Koh-i-Noor, the Versatile 5900. I'll tell you that I like it okay. It is not 100% my favorite, partly because the this and this kind of get loose easily. These little metal fixtures get loose pretty easily. They're easy to tighten as well, but it gives the pencil a little bit of a flimsy feeling. What I love about it actually is that it's very light, and whereas like most lead holders are really, really heavy. So for what it is, I recommend this. I mean, there's things that also it is not, and for that, you'd have to go elsewhere. But in terms of lead holders, I find it's a pretty good one, and so that's the one that I tend to go for. But it's just, I like a lighter pencil. I don't like to feel like my hand is being like guided by the weight of the pencil that I'm using, and so that is why I do that. Really, no other reason. So I don't know. Maybe I have like a decent block in here. It's a little bit difficult to tell when you're drawing. Like I'm actually. By the way, so this drawing is like on a tabletop, whereas my vision is like this. Like I'm looking at it kind of from here, so I have a bit of a weird perspective on it. And if you're watching on YouTube, if I kind of go in like this to actually look at the proportion, my kind of head covers the drawing. So it's something I'm kind of getting used to. I've always drawn totally vertical, so this is a very new kind of experience to me. But I also recognize that for all of you out there watching, probably this is the superior like version of a setup, because you get to see like you're seeing the drawing as flat as possible. Whereas if I'm working on a vertical easel, what that generally means is that you're going to be seeing the drawing like tilted in perspective. So instead of seeing it like that, you're seeing it like this. and it looks like all shrunken and weird in different places. So uh, I'm kind of sort of a little bit committed to figuring out how to draw this way, but it has meant that I've had like um, more trouble with proportion than I would say that I do when I'm working vertically. But hey, listen, no excuses. I'll figure it out eventually. It's just a matter of a bit of practice. It also forces me to like hold my pencil a little bit differently to kind of get the values that I want to get. So there's a couple kind of different features to get used to. But I mean, I know there's plenty of people out there that draw like on a flat table, so it's not. We know it's not impossible, right? Like I'm not going to not be able to figure it out. But in the meantime, things could get like a little bit hairy. But we'll see. We'll see what comes. Right, here we go. Let's see. All right. So a lot of people that are on board about the anatomy studies and doing one of those live. Let's see. Yeah, Eli Schmidt or Schumont was saying that he saw my interview with Proco about we were talking about anatomy, and I was describing my kind of method of doing anatomical studies. He was saying that he couldn't find any version of that out there. Yeah, yeah, that's like I said, I just haven't done it. Haven't really found like the right format for the right platform. So I'm just working on finding the right one. I'm in no hurry to do it, just because I have a lot of other things on my plate as well. One of which, by the way, so quick announcement for my Patreon followers. So I did a poll not too long ago about what I am roughly calling the atelier tier, which is to say I'm going to go into creating a curriculum that basically represents what I learned and taught for about, from 2004 till 2020. All the time that I was with the Florence Academy. I'm figuring out a format or a way to kind of bring that to my online teaching. Now, that it's a huge process and a huge undertaking, and I've been trying to figure out where it fits. And I'm going to be announcing some things about that very soon. I don't want to put it all out here because I'm kind of talking about a lot of different stuff, and I don't want to like muddy the waters in terms of what's going to be in it and what's not going to be in it. But I'll say that it is going to be most likely a very regular feature of my Patreon page. And in addition to that, I am looking for the best possible way to get it to the most amount of people possible. Which, like, basically the idea is how do you get enough people feedback on the kinds of projects they're learning, because I feel like that is the kind of the magic and generally missing ingredient for people is getting that sense of feedback. But it's in the works. Announcement will be coming. Well, I'll just say relatively soon, because that nobody can really hold me to what relatively means, but it's not far off. There's been a lot of like meetings about it and conversations about it. So yeah, exciting stuff coming now. Let's see. Kex the artist is saying, thank you so much. Yeah, saying the go back to the basics advice. Abube is asking, hi Stephen, what have you enjoyed most about your recent foray into colored pencil drawing? Loving them, by the way. Yeah, colored pencil. There were... what did I love about it the most? I think that I really enjoy the prospect of like expressing some things in color, but with the kind of like appearance or aesthetic that drawing has. I mean, if you know me, you know that like I probably, go back and forth between saying that I'm primarily an artist that draws or an artist that paints. Usually indicate that it's about 50-50, but that might be me kind of overselling how much I paint. I really love drawing, and it's very much a primary medium for me. So I love the kind of mark making, like the aesthetic that drawing has. I think just in general is very attractive to me. Like it's a very analytical medium, whereas painting maybe can be a bit more, more like poetry. Drawing is more like prose. So the idea of like injecting a bit of color into that prose, I think was, for me, was very stimulating. So that's probably what I love the most. The biggest problem that I had with it, I think, was just the softness of the medium itself. It meant it was very difficult to get into like the in a way, I guess, like the holes of the paper, right? Like I'm big on like kind of creating a sense of kind of unity through value application and things, and I can get very frustrated if I feel like I'm not able to like achieve an even tone, mostly through application. So I found that was a really kind of tough one, and probably if just talking about it in general, the reason why I'm not doing more of them at the moment is that I kind of thought this doesn't seem like the kind of thing that you get over in the medium. It's yeah. So I kind of think, I don't know. I may or may not do like more colored pencil drawings. They were fun. I love the idea of it, but to me, graphite is just more of a medium that does the stuff that I'm looking to do when I draw. So that is what I'm kind of keeping my eye out for. So this is one of those moments where I actually need to so much of this I could do like just while I'm yapping on to you guys, but I kind of need to focus. I'm kind of placing the tear duct here. And the tear duct is a little bit left of a vertical axis that runs along the edge of the nose. So if I get that in the wrong position, all is lost. So I don't want to mess that up. I don't want to mess anything up really, but when it comes to like placing the eyes, you don't get much more important than that, right? Okay. Triangulation, people, that is how you get there. Let's see. Oh no. So more questions are coming in. Sometimes I have to like scroll through a lot of them to find the because YouTube like kind of automatically scrolls you forward, so it winds up skipping a bunch of them. So if I miss your question, you got to forgive me, but I blame YouTube. Yeah, someone's asking what pencil I'm using for the highlight. By the way, it is in my FAQs, but I'll just tell you, it's another Pentel 120 A3DX, 0.9 millimeter, and it has white chalk inside of it. You can get the names of all that stuff in my FAQs, of which there is a link in the description of this video. Morris2934 is asking, do you think one can spend too much time in the block-in stage? As someone who usually rushes drawings, I've been spending a lot more time making sure to sculpt the form before working on likeness. I mean, yeah, like you can get stalled out in that stage, but that usually has to do with needing to develop the appropriate skills to kind of move on. I find like with students, their drawings stay too generic too long. It's usually because they're needing to actually develop another knowledge base, which is related to how to deal with the application of value and the transition of a drawing from being a predominantly linear statement into a value statement. Which that transition, shouldn't be underestimated in terms of, like how much is involved in it. It's not a simple one answer kind of situation. You need to basically start to understand very well like the planes of the head if you're going to start applying value to them. And that is, again, like it's just a different kind of skill set, different thing that you got to get into. And so usually students that are staying in that block-in phase too long, it's because they don't know how to transition into that next phase, which just, again, it's just another kind of learning, another thing that you have to study up on Practice. Yeah. Let's see. Let's see. Spatial is asking, I guess laying in or block in phase for even 1 hour is not too long. In the end, it's supposed to be flawless. Well, yeah, for sure. Like, the block in phase can be. It doesn't have to be one of the longest stages, but it can be. Like, you can spend a considerable amount of time on it. Certainly, as a beginning student, I'll say that probably your idea of how long you should take on a block in, probably you should take longer than you think, because in general, I believe that beginning drawing students we have an idea that maybe things happen faster than they actually do. So just erring on the side of taking too long is usually not a bad idea for a student. I know I thought I had certain beliefs about how long stuff should take, and you come to find out that it probably takes a little bit longer. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, as you go on, things can get done a little bit faster. But in general, like, it's just one of those things that it takes you as long as it takes to get it right in this stage that you're in. So, figure if you're a very beginning student, it's probably going to take you longer to get that likeness working. If you're, a 10-year veteran of blocking in kind of the same way, yeah, I mean, it's going to happen faster, right? So usually there's kind of a linear progression there. No pun intended. Let's see. Zemi FTW is saying, are you going to be showcasing any works in Norway anytime soon? Would love to see your work in person. That's a cool question. I mean, nah, man, the pandemic has still got us, I mean, the idea of like doing an exhibition, of course, bringing a bunch of people together, I think is not it's not in the cards anytime soon. But with that in mind, I'll just briefly mention here, though I'm perfectly aware that not everybody that loves art is, can collect it. I understand that things cost money, but I'm having a bit of a studio sale coming up on Tuesday. I'll be putting that out on Patreon, and on Wednesday that'll go out on Instagram as well. So just, if there's some drawings of mine that you've been looking at and you've been thinking to yourself, what if I had that one? The opportunity will arise to potentially do that. Like I said, the post is coming out on Tuesday or Wednesday, but like a lot of the work that I've been posting on Instagram lately, it reflects that those works that will be available. So if that is your deal and that is something you're into, then there's kind of a chance for that coming up. If you're not, that's all good as well. I'm happy to have you just checking out my work in general and enjoying it from a distance. Right, so let's see. Chloe Beltran is asking, did you major in arts? Well, I mean, yeah, in the sense that, yeah, like all of my education, when I went to college for a couple of years, and eventually when I went to study at an atelier, all of it was based on studying art. I never went to school for really anything else, so it was a kind of sink or swim situation. It was figure out how to do this stuff or really nothing else. Which, I mean, well, it worked for me, I guess. But it's, you got to be kind of quite committed, I think, to kind of take it to that level. But for any kind of job, if you're all the way in, I think your chances for success greatly increase. If you're kind of halfway in, obviously the opposite is going to be true, in that sense that like you're going to have a diminished opportunity for success. It's hard to see that roadmap, though. I find like I just had like a kind of blind courage about it. Like I was sure I was going to make it work. I had no idea how, but I was certain that I was going to figure it out, which is maybe just the confidence of youth. Had I been older and wiser, would I have had that same confidence? I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, it's funny the kind of questions you can ask yourself when you're kind of dissecting your past a little bit. I'm not sure if I would have had the confidence to to kind of make those choices that I made, because I basically, like, it was sink or swim, and or I guess no, sink or swim is not the right metaphor, but it's basically like figure this out, or you're not gonna have figured anything out. And so that's what I did. It's not for everybody, but it was for me, I guess, at that time. Let's see. Michael Allen is asking, can you talk about your paper preferences and how you prepare them? I use Stonehenge paper, and I usually stretch the paper. It's a kind of a technical process. Again, I put out a tutorial actually on Patreon just specifically about how I stretch paper. It's about a 10-minute video, and it just goes into everything you got to know about kind of preparing it that way. So I think probably the most efficient thing to do would be to refer you there. But basically, I wet the paper and stretch it over a panel most times. Now, this drawing that I'm doing here, this is just me. I'm just sketching here, so all I have is just a paper taped to a board, so nothing too complicated about that. And that's the cool thing with like kind of drawing and painting, is you don't always have to do it with like the most optimum circumstances anyway. If you got a paper and a pencil, you're going to be able to practice this stuff. As time goes on, you're going to want to get like more and more, you're going to want to get better and better circumstances in which to draw and paint, because your sensitivity to like what you need to do that work is going to kind of increase. I like generally a smooth paper because it lets me get even values, and I don't usually work with like super strong darks, so I don't really need like that rough of a paper. Like rough papers, they want to like hold the medium, hold the material, and if you don't need to be like super, like get your blacks to be the blackest black, then probably you don't need like a super rough paper. Maybe you like it, maybe you like to use that, and that's fine, but probably it's not something that is like imperative for the success of your work. Let's see. Pencil is saying, just joining from Kenya. That's great. It's nice to see you. Mysterious MTC says, I'm at the end of my sketch. My reference pic of father is a little bit blurry. How should I do the highlights and sharp points of the sketch? If you have a blurry source image, man, that's a tough spot to start out with. In general, obviously, and you know this, I'm not giving you any advice you don't already know here, but you want to avoid blurry source images as much as possible. But if you find yourself in that situation, I would strongly recommend to make your drawing as much as possible to like suit what your source image is. I guess it's not necessary, or it's not beneficial for you to try to make your drawing something that your source image isn't. You can choose to key your drawing with like a softer focus, and that's totally okay. So actually, that's what I would recommend, if anything, is just don't try to like do more than what your source image will allow you to do, unless you feel like really confident about your ability to like execute that. You know what I mean? Because it is a matter of, it will work or it won't work. You can't. I'm not good at like making stuff up. I actually thought someone was asking a while back, like, because it comes up, because everybody, there's a lot of illustrators, animators out there that work like, from their head. Someone was asking, well, have you ever like drawn from imagination? And I said, yeah, of course. Like mostly it's when I'm like sketching for an idea for a composition or something that I have. Like I never really try and do like a finished drawing from imagination, but then the question was, well, why don't you try that? Like that would be a really cool stream to do, is like to draw like a head from from your head. And I thought, yeah, like that sounds like a fantastic idea. So I don't know, maybe one of these streams, you're gonna show up, and I'm just gonna do draw ahead from imagination, just see where I get to. Like I said, it's not something I've really conscientiously, uh, done in my career. So my guess is I could do okay, mostly just because of a backlog of like anatomy knowledge. But I'm sure there's going to be some fun and embarrassing element to it as well. So yeah, maybe something to look forward to there. But like I said, in representational art, like mostly, you just try and avoid making up something as much as possible, whenever possible, just to avoid having to invent things, because nature is like infinitely more complex than you can kind of imagine it being. Um, the example of this that I always use is like ask students to like draw a tree from their mind, like just from imagination, and then you compare that to like say a photo of a tree, or go look at a tree, and you see like nature is just infinitely more complex than what you can just pull from your imagination. Now, the more you know about trees, probably the more that you can extract from your imagination. And again, that's why anatomy kind of works so well, is that every time you're drawing something, you're remembering it. You're like, I'm looking up at my source images kind of in front of me on the computer here, and I have to look down and make my drawing. Every time I look down, it's like an act of memorization. I'm memorizing the drawing to a greater or lesser degree, and then I'm kind of documenting what I remember about it on my paper. So the more that you know about the thing that you're memorizing, obviously the greater degree to which you'll be able to grasp the larger part of it, right? So that's I think a big idea of the use of anatomy, is strengthening also your visual memory. Let's see. Kevin Haler is asking, do you think classical training has led you to pose your models in a certain way? You don't tend to draw smiling faces, or even when you reference photos. Yeah, well, you know what? It's kind of certainly a habit you get into, like working from life. Is that, I mean, when I learned portraiture, generally the poses would be no shorter than, you'd probably never work less than like 25 hours on a portrait. I mean, unless it's like just a sketch of your friend, but even then, like, you're not going to work less than 3 hours. So when you think about smiling or shouting or any of the other like emotive, faces that you can pull, like that's the reason that in general, like I don't work with that, is because it was not impossible, but highly impractical to expect kind of models to be able to do that. I actually did a portrait back when I was a student of a model that I worked with. I wanted to be like a screaming or shouting portrait, so she had her kind of mouth open. Eventually, my painting of it just looked like she was yawning, which, I mean, I thought it looked like she was yawning. I mean, it wasn't like, I'll tell you what, it wasn't the most convincing scream that's ever been painted. But it's kind of a fun project. Again, like things like that, they're a bit of a discipline. Like you have to practice it. You have to kind of get good at what that is. And such is my respect for people that do that. I don't, like I would have to study it to engage in it. And it's just not something that's really at the center of my interest. Yeah. So let's see. Martin Rivero is saying, any thoughts on the Barcelona Academy of Art? It seems to have and teaches the same concepts as the Florence Academy. Yeah, Jordi, who started the Barcelona Academy, was a student at the Florence Academy. So it's natural, probably a lot of the ideas that you find at one are similar to the other. So yeah. I think it's nice. Jordy's a great guy, really nice guy. He was, I was very briefly actually a teacher of his when he was first at the school. Um, I don't even remember the year that. Anyway, it was a while. It was a while back. But he was always like a nice, chill guy. I remember we visited him once in Barcelona. This is a number of years ago now. I think there was an exhibition at the meme museum when I think the ARC had an exhibition there, and I think my wife and I had work in the show, so we went to Barcelona to check it out. Obviously, we went and saw Jordy and all the people that we knew that were there at the time. Let's see. Eli Schumont is saying, Stephen, do you have any thoughts on George Bridgman's books? I like the idea of masses that he has. It seems a bit like the anatomy I use idea. What shapes the anatomy makes on the body? Yeah, Bridgman's great. I mean, I have to admit, like, I did find him many years ago, and I wonder if this is an experience that a lot of people share, is that initially I found his books a little bit kind of impenetrable, right? Like, he knows so much. And he's coming from such a place of like tremendous knowledge and learning that it maybe can be difficult for a beginner, which we all are at one point or another, to assimilate. And I definitely felt that pinch, studying his work before I had like a long kind of background working with a figure. Eventually, though, I think it proves its value, and in the later years of my study, I think I came to appreciate him a lot more than maybe I did initially. I mean, I appreciated it, but I just couldn't use it. It was so the knowledge was so deep. And as you can hear me saying that, imagining that I can't really shed a lot of light on it from during a Q&A like this, but just suffice to say that I think it's a deep well. I think that it's a valuable thing for students studying Bridgman, and the great thing is, like, he put it all out there. He put together a whole book. Just telling you several books, I think, actually, telling you exactly what he thinks about things. So when you're ready for it, it will be ready for you also to see. So probably got to get just like a good base of kind of drawing knowledge before I think you really tackle Bridgman. I mean, I know it's like meant to be like foundational or kind of basic in a sense. I didn't find it that way. I'd be curious to know what everybody out there thinks. Whether you read Bridgman and like the first time you read it, you thought, "Yep, totally got this, no problem, no worries." Like I said, I didn't find it that way. I was pretty overwhelmed by it initially. But over the years, like I said, you kind of get to know a few things and get a few tricks up your sleeve, and it gets a little bit easier. Right, so other questions. Let's see. Some people watching the stream and drinking coffee. I could kill a cup of tea right now. I should do like a little like intermission here, because I've got it's either going to be an intermission now, or it's going to be like the stream's going to end in about, I don't know, 20 minutes or so. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you're like, I'm done with this stream already, peace out, finish it and go have a cup of tea, then it would be good to know. Let's see. Morris 2934 is asking, do you have an opinion on limiting yourself while drawing, using a limited number of supplies and not getting carried away with the tools at hand? Yeah, I mean, in general, right? Like, this is a good thing. It's not necessarily the tools that are going to make the drawing. But like all things, I like to have a soft edge around that, because it's also not true that materials have nothing to do with what you're doing, so there's kind of like there's a soft line around that. I agree with you for sure. Like in a sense, like materials don't make the drawing, but also, you know, I mean, you are using them for the drawing, so they do have an impact as well. So I'm a little bit in between those two. You know, I mean, like I said, just a soft edge defining that to say, yeah, sure, you know, don't get too fixated and limit yourself a bit. But on the other hand, you know, I mean, tools are tools, man. They're you know, and sometimes, by the way, you know, it's fun just to have a new, like I'm a big like tools person, so so I'm just gonna offer the kind of balanced opinion here, you know, and say a little bit of both won't kill you. Right. I'm not, you know, I always think, man, I'm gonna get this drawing done in a couple of hours. I'm gonna draw really fast, but I never really draw it all that fast. Let's see. Ivan Levko is doing a fantastic unsolicited critique. Appreciate that. Let's see. Susan P. Faust is saying the same thing. Anyway, someone's asking if I'm doing planning on doing live workshops in Scandinavia. No, I'm not actually. Certainly, it's not really an active part of the plan just because of the pandemic. But it's also, you know, teaching in person is obviously it's like really time consuming, and so it's very difficult actually to manage to be able to do like kind of all this stuff at once. So probably teaching IRL, teaching like in real life. I don't know, man. I mean, we're gonna have to get a long way past the pandemic before I could really say anything about anything useful about that. Let's see. Arib Ansari is asking, how do you know what contours to darken and what contours to be light? Generally, I think you just look for contrast, right? Like, so if you're like looking at a contour like this one, obviously you have like a very like kind of dark contrasting value there. It's a great place to use like a darker edge. Here, obviously, there's not really even a contour. It's not the ending of a form, so I use a much kind of lighter edge for that. I just try and keep it simple. Try not to make too many like super, I don't know, contrasting edges or things like that. Try and keep it as simple as possible. That's always what I'm thinking. Let's see. A couple of people are saying to draw with a GoPro. Yeah, I think. I mean, all right. Well, let me ask you a question because I haven't actually used a GoPro. Maybe you have some insight on this that I don't have. But wouldn't it be like shaking around all over the place and make it like kind of hard to see the drawing happening? I mean, especially if it was like on me. I thought the idea of like having a GoPro, you know, to get a better angle on the drawing could be interesting, but even so, I'm not overly convinced of it yet. But if you're a GoPro expert and you're telling me that it's not going to be too shaky, then maybe that's interesting. Maybe I should check it out. Yeah. Let's see. Abubi is asking, what do you find is the right balance for you between shorter and longer drawings and paintings, or if it's something you think about? Yeah, it's a fair question, you know, like just because, I mean, it's so demanding time-wise, like just making drawings, it's not easy. Like there's so many other things that you have to do, and so the idea of like making one faster sounds good, but in general, like I'm not able to achieve an aesthetic level that I like quite so fast, and so that usually means that I want to like kind of slow down. So I do think about it for sure. Like it's definitely something that kind of comes up because you'd love to be able to, you know, make it. What's wrong? Make a drawing faster. It sounds great. But in general, I don't find it's for me at least. I don't find that it's like very realistic to do that at least. So yeah, that's where I usually wind up, is that like, yeah, it sounds great, but then in practice it doesn't really kind of like work that way. Yeah, so let's see. I mean, the drawing is kind of getting somewhere, but you know, there's plenty of things about it that that need some work, need some effort kind of put into them. So maybe I need to adjust my sights in terms of where I feel like the drawing is going to go. Let's see. Oh, sorry, I got to scroll to find a question here. Let's see. Renfall says, I realized the other day I hold my pencil a lot like you do, way back in the base, though I'm a lot looser with my sketching. Yeah, like holding it further back is just something you kind of pick up, or I picked up, like working vertically. It's a lot easier to do when you're kind of working vertically, to kind of hold the pencil further back. And it also kind of helps keep your drawings a bit more broad, kind of in general, which is a good thing. Like breadth is something you're always kind of chasing after. Try not to like bite on the small details, and trying to kind of figure out like what the big picture stuff is, that's going to make the drawing kind of better or worse. That's I think the thing I find hardest actually about working horizontal is just keeping track of that big picture stuff. I find it really really difficult actually. Like all my tutorials, like all the stuff that I do on Patreon it's all vertical. I mean, I don't think that'll ever. Well, I don't know. I mean, will I change that? Will I start working a lot more horizontally? I don't know. I do it mostly like for live streams. So otherwise, I would be working vertical. I did actually some vertical live streams before, but then, of course, the problem is the camera's at a different angle for everybody watching than it is for me. So that's its own kind of difficulty that you face. It's like, yeah, making a drawing is hard enough, but then, you know, trying to broadcast that. I mean, the reality is, I thought it's not really that big a deal if you guys see it a little bit in perspective. Like, so what if it's a little bit like thinner because you're looking at it from the side? But I got some feedback from a colleague of mine who was like, yeah, it looks like the proportions are wrong. So I was like, well, I wonder how I can fix that. And like, he works vertically, so I thought I'll give kind of working vertically a try and see if that's like the silver bullet, like that makes it all work out. But I don't know. We'll see, man. I try not to get like too kind of tied into any one thing, which, you know, means that maybe I spend a little bit of extra time like figuring stuff out, but I'm also not, you know, like stuck in a rut with a working process that I'm not really that fond of. You know, I always try to keep it a little bit fresh, which is much easier said than done. Right, let's see. Questions. Yeah, the Kohinoor lead holders have colored pencil leads as well. That's interesting. Yeah, maybe because I was talking about colored pencils earlier and like how I felt I wasn't really in love with how like soft the wax for them was, and like the actual drawing experience. I didn't really love it. I thought it was kind of okay, but it's one of the things that made me kind of not want to do colored pencil. So Morris is saying here that actually the like 2mm lead holders like this, they also make colored pencil leads for that. Yeah, I mean that sounds interesting. You know, like in general, like I've worked a bit with like kind of color before in drawing, and kind of using like chalks and things like sanguine chalks and things in conjunction with like other materials like graphite and stuff, and like that's kind of interesting. But of course, like the difference in the substance makes it a little bit harder to to like kind of make everything work together a little bit, you know. Anyway, But it's a cool idea. I like that idea. Kylo is asking if I ever changed my reference to black and white. I mean, I have done it before. It's yeah, I've done it before. Sure. You know, it's I don't view it as like a totally necessary thing to do, but I've done it and I can see why people would do it. And I can totally understand the utility of it. But it's, you know, I'm used to kind of translating the world of color into black and white. I've been doing it for many years now, so I'm not as bothered by it. Maybe. Let's see. How do I study? Marquise Fortune is asking, how do I study value as a beginner? This is a fair question. I think that you want to start with some like basic premise, and for me, the idea that value and form are connected to each other, right? Basically, form, we're just talking about roundness, and value, of course, we're talking about relative degree of light and dark. Now, studying values, I think, kind of has to be attached to the idea of also studying some kind of form, because like values, you don't ever really like use values just on their own. Like they're always kind of being used to describe something. And I think the primary place that you're going to be describing things as a beginning student would be in terms of describing form. So I think that it's a great place to start actually with, that's why I always recommend this to students, is starting with that, just drawing a sphere, right? So you start to draw a sphere and you start to understand, you know, how a gradation of value leads to the impression of form, how it can create an impression of light. It opens a lot of doors for you, and so that's one of the reasons I think like starting out with like a sphere like that is probably like a really, I think a really productive thing for students to do. So that would be I think the best advice I could give about starting out to study values. Start with really simple forms. And if you find that resonates with you, you know, I mean, there's spheres, there's cubes, there's cones, there's all sorts of like simplified forms that you can get into that are going to help you deepen your knowledge and understanding of how values work and how to kind of use them. Because it has to be like, of course, a very practical way of beginning to understand them. Let's see. Phyllis Riley says, I watched you and Proco go through the old sketches of yours. You should add some to the sale. Phyllis makes a very good point. I have definitely a deep catalog of old sketches. There's some of, actually, you know, a couple of people asked about the colored pencil drawings. I'm going to put a couple of those into the sale as well. So there'll be some very affordable little sketches, all the way up to, you know, even some finished oil paintings are in there. But like in general, if you've seen, you know, if you've seen my Patreon tutorials, like basically those are the drawings and paintings that are going to be in my studio sale. So if any of that stuff is interesting to you, that's awesome, and it will be there. Let's see. When doing a skull study, Brett Colonel is asking when doing a skull study, what details are you concentrating on, and what are you editing out? In general, I'm going to be concentrating on like larger plane structure, and leaving out just like kind of surface details. So like if you looked at, you know, some of the nuances of value in a cheek like this, that's the kind of thing I might kind of leave out and just leave it as kind of a flat plane. You know, it's just about kind of time economy in a way, like that I don't have, you know, the time to render out like detail, but I can indicate, you know, large planes and things like that. And that's what I'm always trying to focus on with those skull studies, especially because a lot of them are done, you know, live. So, you know, I've really got to like zip through it, which is like, we all know what is the enemy of getting your proportions right: going fast or being distracted. So live streams, you know, are tough, people. I don't know if any of you out there have drawn live before, but it's yeah, it's a little bit of a different ball game. Let's see. Wild Food is asking, rough paper shows darker values. Can you explain why that is so? It's not so much that it shows darker values, but that it captures the medium a little bit more easily, right? Like for instance, if you're using charcoal, if you ever have drawn with charcoal, you're drawing on a very smooth paper, you understand like you're only able to what's the word, like push a certain amount of that medium onto the paper, whereas like a rougher paper, like more tooth, is going to pick up and hold the charcoal a little bit better. It's not totally dissimilar with graphite, except that in general, you know, like graphite's a bit of a harder medium, so you don't need like as rough a paper as with charcoal. I'm talking like for charcoal, we're talking like a hot press watercolor paper that's just, you know, just has like mountain tops on it, you know, in terms of the kind of the tooth on the paper. Whereas again, like even the roughest paper that you would use for graphite would never probably be quite that rough. Right, let's see here. SF Art and Craft asks, what's your age and when did you start drawing? My age is 40. I'm 40 years old. I'm quite happy to be 40. I enjoy being a bit older. When I was younger, life was a lot tougher. As I've gotten older, life's gotten a little bit better. So that's really nice. And I've been drawing. I've been drawing, I guess, educated drawing. It's probably been since I was 24. Before that, I mean, yeah, sure, I drew, but I didn't have really any idea what I was doing. So it's not. I view it as like a pre-education life as an artist. You know, and I'm not saying like it's not like a commentary on anybody else. If you just draw casually, and I mean, it's not like a criticism. I'm just saying that, you know, for me, there's like a pretty clear like before and after. You know, before I studied and after I studied, my work is kind of dramatically different. So I would say I've been doing what I'm doing for just under 20 years. Yeah. I mean, I was kind of interested in representational art before that, you know, but it's like, yeah, I mean, how much can you know before you've like kind of properly studied something? Yeah. So 15 years. Something, 20 years maybe, somewhere around there. Let's see. Eli Schumann says, absolutely, Bridgman's books are a mess. They are a mix-up of student notes, and so they're kind of incomprehensible. It starts to make sense after a while. Yeah, that's what I found as well, is that like the more that I studied, the more that I knew, like I feel like the more I was able to make out of Bridgman's books. You know, he's obviously an absolute stellar genius, but sometimes, you know, like genius level thought is not as accessible for a student. You know, it's a different thing to teach the uninitiated than it is to teach people that are like already deep into a field or a career. Let's see. Seema Gautam says, I'm from Nepal and I enjoy your works. An architecture student. Yeah. I do. I'm a big architecture fan and architect enthusiast. I think that if I was not a representational painter or artist, probably it would have been very easy for me to become excited about the idea of becoming an architect. Just because I think it's such an amazing trade with such obviously rich history, and no, it's incredible. So yeah, architecture is a huge, I guess, like fan of like beautiful architecture. You know, as much as there is like fandom for architecture, but I think you grasp my meaning. Let's see. Mary Beth Bellin saying, "Go get tea and come back." Let's see. All right, so let's see where the questions are. Bugaro or Ang is Alex Hess is asking. Just curious. Bugaro or Ang? Bugaro or Ang? Well, so I think actually for me it's not tremendously hard. I wanted to kind of think about my answer just for a second before I kind of blurted it out. But no, I think it's definitely Bugaro. I find so much more. And by the way, right? So I was gonna say I find so much more naturalism in Bugaro. Obviously, that is so. Ang has like a very mannered approach to his paintings and his aesthetic. And while if you like that kind of mannerism, it's perfect. If you don't like it, well, it becomes the statement feature that you don't like. And so for me, with Ang, it's just a difference in taste, and that's really all it is. I mean, he's of course, as you say, Alex, he's a master in his own right, and so I'm not saying don't like Ang. I'm only saying that for me and him, there is a difference in taste, and that difference is a gap that we will not meet in the middle of. So yeah, I prefer Bugaro for sure. Nate Rogers is saying, "Oops, not sure I sent my question earlier, so I'll repeat. Curious to know what you think about texture in paper. I'm contemplating a roll of Strathmore 400 series watercolor paper." It's so tricky, like when you get that question, because unless I'm like totally certain about the paper, I'm not gonna say that. Yeah, like 100% go for it. I think Strathmore 400 series generally makes like a relatively smooth drawing paper, and I think it's just fine for purpose. Yeah. So I don't think you're gonna like go wrong with Strathmore 400 series if it's the one I'm thinking of. So kind of go for it. Would be my recommendation. Otherwise, Stonehenge by Legion paper is one that I kind of recommend to students, and I kind of stand by. I think it's it's just a paper that you're not going to go wrong with. It's versatile. You can kind of do a lot with it. The other one that I would suggest, like if you wanted a little bit more tooth, would be Canson's Miton, which is I'm sure some French person out there will pronounce it much better than me, but the Canson Miton paper is also a very good paper for drawing. A little bit toothier, so it kind of gives you the possibility to get a little bit more graphite kind of onto the surface of it. So for that reason, I think it's kind of nice. Let's see. Robert Wolf is asking if I practice blind contour drawings. I remember doing those in college. My teachers like started us out doing blind contour drawings. To answer your question, no, I don't. I don't do them. I remember doing them in college. I can't say that I ever fully grasped like the total utility of them. They seemed in a way to me to be like coming out of this idea of like kind of automatic drawing, or this idea of like drawings that kind of create themselves. So no, it just didn't really dovetail with or doesn't really dovetail, I think, with my particular interests about drawing. So no, maybe if you have like, by the way, some thought about it, like chuck it in the comments. I'd love to see what your kind of opinion about it is, if there's something that I'm missing. I mean, because it is a kind of common practice. Let's see. SF Art and Craft asks if I'm tired. I don't know. Do I look tired? I hope not. Michael Allen saying, what are your contemporaries that you really admire or even jealous of? Jealous of all of them. They're all really good, and and I wish that I could do the best version of all the things that they do great, of course. But I have talked about before. I kind of feel like you, I mean, unfortunately, it just simply doesn't work that way. Like, because each of them, like, I've spent my 20 years or whatever, right? Each one of them has spent their kind of 20 years focusing on something, and I could no more want to do or be exactly as good as they are at what they do than they could be at exactly what I do. So it's kind of a you resign yourself to the fact that you are what you train, and if you want to get good at something, it's going to take the same amount of time it took you to get good at really kind of probably everything else. But there's plenty of artists that are really great out there. I mean, there's things, I look at my wife's paintings and I think there's things I'd prefer if I could do as well as she does. I mean, yeah, the quick answer is, yeah, all of them. Sure, definitely. 100%. Let's see. Nadia Mikhailova says, how do you draw so good and then talk at the same time? I think it's debatable whether I'm drawing good. I think that's the answer to that question. I'm trying my best. But I think that there's probably some things about this that upon closer examination will reveal themselves to be a little bit wanting. So I appreciate your estimation there that I am doing the thing I'm setting out to, which is drawing good. But how do you do it and talk at the same time? Well, I mean, I guess I've been talking for a living for a really long time. I started teaching in... When did I start teaching? My third year at the academy, I became an assistant instructor to a really wonderful and amazing artist called Simona Dolci. She was the director of the drawing program in Florence, and she kind of took me under her wing, and I taught together with her for several years. Really wonderful, wonderful experience, and really great person. She actually this is, I don't think anybody probably knows this. I don't think I've ever talked about this like publicly before, but it's not a huge secret. But actually, so I got engaged to my now wife, Cornelia, when we were living in Florence, and I was so incredibly poor. Actually, Simona was the one who actually bought a couple of little paintings off of me, which in turn gave me the money to buy the engagement ring that I gave to my wife. So that was must have been 2006-ish, somewhere around there. So I've been teaching since 2006, and naturally you do a lot of like kind of drawing on students' drawings, and you teach workshops, and so you do live demos. So it all just kind of comes as a part of the package a little bit. Eventually, if you teach long enough, probably you've been talking and drawing at the same time long enough that you've gotten at least pretty good at it. But I appreciate your estimation that I'm doing a good job here. Because it is a challenge. I can't deny that. Let's see, Morris2934 is saying, have you ever done bark drawings as it is on the plates, the block-in version and the finished version next to each other? Would you benefit from redrawing the plate once more before finishing it? It maybe is a misconception to think that drawing the bark perfectly is, to have a successful experience doing a bark drawing. They are places to kind of learn a concept. And if you do a perfect drawing of the drawing, yet do not internalize the concept, like if you just, literally just gridded it out and like copied every millimeter, I think that there's every opportunity that you wouldn't get as much as somebody who had done a less proficient copy, but taken more time on kind of learning and understanding the block-in. So when I say like after you've done your drawing to like go back and do another drawing of it to like perfect it. No, I think just take your drawing and take your lesson and maybe move on from there. Let's see. Which, by the way, yeah, in the atelier tier, I will be eventually addressing the idea of doing like a full Barg tutorial, so that I'll be doing demos and lectures, all the stuff that goes along with one of my tutorials. I'll be doing that. Certainly about Bargs, but also other kind of beginning drawing kind of concepts as well. Let's see. Ellie Schumont is saying, personally, I don't really mind seeing drawing in perspective at all during the live streams. Doesn't change how the live stream goes, and it seems like a pain for you to fix. Yeah, well, you know, you're not wrong. It is a bit of a pain for me to fix. So there's every possibility that in the future, like I'll go back to working vertically as well. But for now, you know, I'm just kind of feeling it out, and we'll see like kind of how it goes. If working this way is okay. Like I said, I just feel like it's something I probably just have to get used to. Kind of working in this way, which is a little bit different than what I normally do. I think like for now, for instance, like I don't think I'm doing really bad with the proportions. I think they're just a little bit, they're a little bit wobbly. But like they're not much worse than maybe they're not like unfixable. It's just maybe like a width here and a width there. You know, it's also, by the way, like, you know, talking while drawing. I'm definitely doing like less double checking than I would normally do, so that kind of creates a bit of a deficit in terms of accuracy. Certainly, I've noticed that over the time that I've been kind of doing live streams, is that I have a tendency to be a bit less accurate when I'm drawing live. But hey, you know, I mean, what are you gonna do? It's if you want to tune in to me doing a perfect drawing, I will be completely silent, and that's just how that'll be, which I think would be a slightly less engaging broadcast than me drawing while talking. I don't know. Leave your opinion in the comments if you think I talk too much while drawing. Then I would definitely do a stream where all I do is draw. But like I said, I imagine that hearing somebody chat about something they know is going to be more of an engaging, interesting experience for you. But I appreciate, by the way, your comment saying like that you don't mind a bit of perspective. I don't mind it either. Again, like this is just something that was kind of brought up to me, and I thought, well, if this guy who, you know, I mean, he's a colleague of mine that I really respect, if this is bothering him, you know, I mean, maybe this is like a common opinion, right? Like, or something that kind of everybody would notice, and I just didn't think of it. So that's why, you know, I'm kind of trying to draw in this more flat way for you guys. Let's see. A lot of questions coming in. I'm scrolling up. Oh no, there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of questions I'm not going to make it to. Yusri is, hey, it's Yusri. I haven't heard from her in ages. She used to be a mentorship student of mine. Do I like printmaking? Yeah, no, I totally do. I used to actually took printmaking in college. I was talking with Mario Robinson yesterday on the Clubhouse app. I don't know if anybody here is on Clubhouse yet, but if you are, I am on Clubhouse, and you can follow me there as well. But I was having a conversation with him about like early art education experiences, and one of them was that, you know, I found, you know, when I went to college, printmaking was one of the most useful classes I took. I mean, mostly because like the college I went to, it wasn't a great, and this is, you know, I don't want to be unfair to like all the teachers there, are really great guys, and you know, had a obviously it was a great experience eventually, but I would say that in terms of like academic principles of drawing and painting, that there were not a tremendous amount of them. And because of that, I did feel like actually printmaking was the class where I did the most technical learning about anything. And so I like that about it, because like if you're making an etching, you're either making an etching or not. Like the painting programs, at various schools can be a little bit of like a nebulous territory, right? Because in contemporary art education, if there's paint on something, technically that's enough to like call it a painting course. So, whereas I was more interested in representational, making stuff look like stuff. That's what I wanted to learn, and it wasn't as much like on offer there. So, yeah, I love printmaking. I think it's really fascinating. Let's see. Stephen or Ellie Shimon asks, "What is the biggest one should draw based off a smaller reference drawing? I work on a 7-inch tall laptop screen, so my references have to be pretty small." Ooh, that's a kind of intriguing question. Is there an answer for that? Is there like a maximum scale? I would suppose that it probably has more to do with the amount of detail in your source image. Like if it's like a low res image, you could only get so large and still be able to see what it was. So I would assume as long as you can zoom in, you should be able to work almost any size. I mean, that's my first thought on it. Which, first thoughts, they are what they are. Maybe that's not the accurate one. But I feel like as long as you have a sufficient amount of detail in the source image, that you should be able to take it pretty far from a scale perspective. I think it's when you get into that place where you have actually very little detail, like a low res image, that actually it could be very difficult to proceed or progress in terms of making like a larger drawing. Like I've made drawings that are several times above life size, working from a photograph, and it's just a matter of your, like I said, ability to extract detail. Because, when you make a larger drawing, there's a demand for, like just visually speaking, there's a demand for like a slightly greater sense of detail in the drawing. Like you need to, it's like you're more up close to something, and so you need to like see a little bit more of it. And because of that, I would say you need probably a little bit more detail in your source image. Let's see. Goku Dinesh is asking, what do you think about cross-hatching to render form, something like Anders Zorn etchings? Yeah, I mean, to say, I'm not going to be the one that comes out and says, I don't like the aesthetic of Anders Zorn's etchings. I think they're amazing. Like, you could debatably say that his etchings were more interesting than his paintings. I mean, I'm probably walking on thin ice there. I mean, I'm sure the Zorn fans of the world are like, smashing their keyboards right now. But no, I think absolutely, like his style of hatching, I think is fantastic. And if you could capture that in dry media like drawing, go for it, man. I think it's amazing. Yeah, it's great. Love his work. Ian Mrozek is asking, I've noticed that a few of your models wear specs, optical glasses. What is your advice for drawing people with glasses? Or should I just ask the model to remove their glasses? It depends. If their glasses are a characteristic feature of that model, then I think you gotta work with the glasses. In general, I probably tend to prefer models without glasses. I just find it's reveals more of the eye to me, and that's something that obviously I put a value on, because the eyes are a really descriptive part of human anatomy, and if you can emphasize them and show them in a portrait, your opportunity to make a successful portrait increases, I think, along with that. So yeah, I would most times I would say let's have the eyes, just in general. Yeah. Let's see. Someone saying that I look younger than 40. Much appreciation for that. As much as I don't mind aging, I also don't mind people saying I look younger than I am, so that's nice. Yeah, ooh, interesting question. Someone's asking, Kyler Kobo is asking, how do you overcome the stress of drawing? Um, I always think about it like, so I used to work in, when I was younger, I used to work in restaurants a lot, like, on summers from the academy or even actually before I even went to college. I would work in restaurants and things. And if you ever worked in a restaurant, it's like it's really fast paced. Like stuff is moving fast all around you. And I always found like the first days were in a way the most stressful because you didn't even know like where to stand. Like you didn't even know how to be out of the way. So I would just always feel like like the world was like spinning out of control around me, and I didn't have any place to be. That's my vision of something like really really stressful, and I think that probably there's an element of that when you're kind of learning about drawing as well, is that you're in this place where you don't know how to like slow down and just like even take your time. Like even that is a concept that's in a way quite difficult to negotiate. So I think it's one of those things where I think you probably just have to have failed a few dozen times and then you get over it. And I don't know if there's like a substitute for it. I've made so many bad drawings in my life, just uncountable amounts of bad drawings. And through that, I realized that the worst thing that happens when I make a bad drawing is that the drawing's bad, and then I just go on to the next drawing that hopefully will be a little bit better. And once you realize like those are the stakes and the consequences, I think that your shoulders relax a little bit. You kind of get into that place where probably you can focus a little bit better. Because when you are stressed out, it's not a very great like kind of focused place to be. It's kind of, you're erratic and you're trying to make judgments too soon, too rapidly, and you're probably being like overly self-critical. There's probably a lot of things that are kind of happening there that in general are not helping the situation in terms of your ability to kind of draw well. So yeah, I think just make sure you've made a few dozen drawings and you realize what the stakes are, because frankly they're not that high. Let's see. Chloride is asking, just wanted to say it feels incredibly great to participate in these live streams. This Q&A style feels so much more intimate than your usual YouTube videos. Your work inspires me a lot. Thank you so much, Chloride. Let's see. Mangala Shailesh is saying, I've not done any course. I'm interested in portraits. How do I go about it? I'm 47. That's a great, like, kind of comprehensive question. Like, I want to get into portraits. I haven't done it. How do I do it? and the age along with it as well. Well, I think you start with. I think you have to start with the basics of drawing. I think, and it's interesting to think about this because, when I say that, well, you'd think, oh, well, yeah, like, I want to learn to draw portraits. So, like, I'll learn, obviously, the basics of drawing portraits. Well, there's the basics of drawing, and there's the basics of drawing portraits. Like, they're kind of two different things. The basics of drawing really kind of apply to drawing many different things, not necessarily just portraits. However, they are the things that you also need to draw portraits. So I would say to you that you need to seek out some training in the basics of drawing anything. And then you can move on to the basics of drawing portraits. Or simultaneously, however your patience allows you to do it. If you're really impatient to learn and to get started with portraits, then you can start that at the same time. But I would highly recommend to you to, at the very least, kind of learn both at the same time. I will mention as well, because the connection is so clear, Of course, the third installment of my Drawing Essentials program is coming on March 1st. So if you are a Patreon subscriber, you will have access to that, as well as like all the other content that I make, which is vast and extensive. It's like, by this point, honestly, it's got to be like 200 hours of courses and concepts and you name it. It's all there. Anyway, I will move on now. Eli Schumont is saying Nicolaides and Betty Edwards use blind contours to build hand-eye coordination. Seems like they are better exercises to do, though, in my opinion. Oh, there are better. Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about the kind of blind contour drawings as well. It's not bad. It's just probably there's better things you could do. So Gracie Shack, art streamer, asks, I'm not very good at drawing people. Is there anything you may help me out with to, how do I go about getting better at sketching people? Yeah, well, you know, there's a whole host of concepts that are maybe not exclusive to, I mean, or how to put this? Yes, absolutely. There's plenty of things that I can say that can help you out specifically with drawing people. They would require, of course, some explanation. But if you just want the name of the big idea, I think start with the idea of structural symmetry, right? Like the human body as a subject is conceived in a symmetrical way. And so what we really need to start doing is understanding the human body in 3 dimensions, which as I'm answering this, I know like this is probably too complicated. I'm trying to give you like the simplest version of it. But structural symmetry basically means if you find something on one side, find it on the other. If you see highlight in the cheekbone, look for the other cheekbone. They're going to be at the same height along a horizontal axis, or roughly so. That is, I think, one like basis for studying the human form that you can like start with. And it's something that people have an immense amount of difficulty with, usually because they don't know they're looking for it. After that, I mean, you know, that question just gets deeper and deeper and deeper, and there's a kind of unending amount of things that you can learn about, you know, working with a human figure that essentially makes it like an endless well of like interesting stuff to learn. But you're in for a fun ride if you're just starting out. Let's see. Michael Kibulka is asking, what are your feelings about Norman Rockwell? Do you think his work is being recognized more 40 years after his passing? Yeah, man, Norman Rockwell was, I loved, you know, he was one of my favorites for years, you know. Just kind of, I really loved his technique, and his kind of clarity in painting was always really beautiful. And yeah, like I don't know, there was a lot about Rockwell that I loved. And yeah, there's been, I think, since Rockwell passed away, probably there has been an ongoing campaign about like taking his work a little bit more seriously. And so I totally understand where you're coming from there. And are people closer to doing it? I don't know. I mean, it's difficult to take the temperature of anything like that and try to understand like where people are at with it. But I think we're in a world where, you know, in general, like the further you get away from the date of that thing, the easier it is to kind of understand the context of it. So I would say that, yeah, we're probably well on the way to kind of appreciating Rockwell a little bit more. Yeah, why not? At least I hope we are. That's the world I want to be living in. All right. Let's see. So I was just looking for a question here. Michael Allen says, I'm envious of your patience to stay away from the details. Do you have any advice on slowing down? You know, yeah, it's an interesting thing because, you know, over the years kind of working with a lot of students, you realize that slowing down is not an impulse that people reject or they don't want. They want to. But drawing is like an active thing. You have to you have to have something to do on the paper to be drawing. And so I think usually in my experience, people progressing past a block-in too fast is simply that they have not developed yet a very complex idea of how to use a block-in. A block-in's like a tool. And the better you get at using block-ins, the more time in general that you can spend doing the block-in. You know, you can, like a lot of students will exhaust their imagination of what to do with a block-in relatively quickly because they don't have much experience with it. So really, I mean, and this is like so much art advice, and you know, so it's not really a revelation, but really you just need to kind of practice doing more block-ins, like get into that whole field, that whole concept, until you kind of gain a sense of like mastery about block-ins. At that point, you won't have any problem like taking a long time to do it because you'll have plenty of stuff to do. But it's like if you are just starting out drawing, you've never really done block-ins, and I'm saying you need to spend like an hour on a block-in. It's like a prison sentence. It's like, how do I do that? It's like, I've got there's all this detail I need to like get to. That's what I can see. You kind of learn to see past that stuff. Then I think the question will not be like, how do you take the time? It'll be like, how do you manage to get it done? Because there'll be so much that you can kind of realize to do there. But probably I have to leave the stream here. It's evening time in Norway. Oh, I just tapped the mic. Sorry about that, people. But it's evening time here in Norway, and it's been probably a couple hours of drawing. I really appreciate everybody that was here. If you're interested in in-depth... let me say that again. If you are interested in in-depth portraiture tutorials, you can check my Patreon page. $10 gets you so much content. It's crazy. And also, don't forget, March 1st is part 3 of my Drawing Essentials series. It's going to be live on Patreon for subscribers. And if you're a subscriber already, I'll see you there. If you're not, hit the link in the description of this video or the one that pops up later, and find me over there. Take care, everybody, and thank you so much for all your questions.